Don't know what's going on. Can anyone hear Angie if she's talking? Thumbs up.
Yeah, if you can hear me, someone give me a thumbs up, and if you can, I'll just rock and
If
roll.
everyone else can hear you, I think you should take it away because I'm having some serious problems here.
I'm waiting to see if they can. Anyone want to give me a thumbs up if they can? I think you can hear me fine, so we'll just rock and roll. Yep, got one. Haha, let's go. We don't need two hosts. Although, like I said, this will be terrible. He'll listen later, and hear me say how terrible it is that he's not here. So just so you guys know, you're in the audience, and yeah. Anywho, what the heck is going on today? Not much, honestly. I will say that every day for probably the next 4 years. It'll be a just. Lots of stuff happening today. Definitely am watching. We saw a little bit of a push up higher in price overnight. Obviously, yesterday we had seen a bit of a sell off. It ran into some technical selling in both wheat and soybeans, and corn kind of just went along for the ride. What we're watching the most overnight, I think what's really kind of helping potentially is that you are seeing President Trump expressed some optimism in his and administration's ability to negotiate another trade deal with China. And now I say express optimism. We'll call it that. Basically, he was asked, is another trade deal possible with China? And he said, yeah, it's possible. He said it's possible twice, which definitely, is far more reinforcing than if he had just said it once, in my opinion. Obviously, that's a little sarcastic, but he did go on to say that he and China's President Xi, have a great relationship. They're competitive with one another, but they have this great relationship. And so we did see, this idea or this talk here that potentially we are going to return to a trade deal with China. And that's a huge thing. We've come into the second round of election without that concept or with the idea that we would blow up trade with China. We're still a long way away from making this happen or, basically breathing a sigh of relief. But I do think it's quite interesting that China's leadership has remained relatively quiet in the recent round of tariff threats. You really haven't seen them come back out and look to engage. You did see, some rollback of some of the trade war rhetoric between China and the European Union, with some talk that we could see the same thing happen between China and Canada. And so we are seeing a little bit of some relaxation potentially with a little bit more of what China's has been kind of hawkish in the world market when it comes to trade and some of these other things. And so perhaps that's part of it in, what we're seeing here. We did see China's Premier Li also come and say overnight to Chinese state media, just kind of reiterating that they are going to make sure that consumption is given a more prominent position. And one of the things that I think is most interesting about China right now that we really have to pay attention to is that they're working to expand different industries and the educational opportunities that come or are needed to kind of be able to bolster these industries. And now I'm not saying that is like earth shaking or groundbreaking by any means that they're doing that. I mean, that's the kind of an intelligent thing to do, but it definitely will help to I think support consumer sentiment going forward if they're not only given the stimulus that they're discussing, given, talking about vouchers and purchasing different, things, cash for clunkers for household appliances, etc. You're also talking about increased wages and better educational opportunities, which I think we've all discovered or all know that is the driver of consumer sentiment and demand as we go forward. So obviously we're going to be paying attention to China. There's a lot of conversation too, while talking about paying attention to what goes on with China and Trump and China. We are watching a very interesting war of words, kind of erupt between Trump and Zelensky. So last week, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent traveled to Ukraine with his the administration's proposal, this $500 billion basically proposal that, in exchange for security and in exchange for some of these other things, Ukraine will allow the U.S. to have access to these rare earth minerals. Now, basically, Zelensky said at the start of the week, like, we're not doing that. That's not going to happen. It's not a serious conversation is kind of one of the things that he'd said. And you have to know, as soon as you kind of the not a serious conversation for me, I was like, oh, that's just not going to land well with Trump. And it has not. And so now he's saying that basically Zelensky broke the deal. It was a draft. Both sides, it sounded like they would be interested in going forward. But now he's saying Zelensky broke the deal. He's calling him a dictator. He's saying that Ukraine was at fault for the war. And a few other things that are really, really, really getting, folks in the West, quite worked up, and for good reason. So there's a lot of things that we have going back and forth there. And I do think, when it comes down to it, you're seeing some folks from the European Union or from Europe in general, because you've got the British Prime Minister set to come forward too, or come next week to DC. There's a lot of talk about what this could look like, and if it really matters. And so the interesting twist in all of this is that there is a lot of talk that there may not even be these rare earth minerals in Ukraine to tap into anyway. Javier Blas put out an article yesterday, saying that the U.S. Geographical Survey doesn't even show that there's anything there. They've been mining certain spots for the last decade or whatever and not finding anything. And so, it's kind of interesting to think that this whole entire thing could kind of, break down just on the back of, some deal that wasn't even necessarily put in or wasn't even official in the first place. But then, of course, this is the direction that we're going. So that's something we've got to watch, because, when it comes down to it, we're discussing, and this is probably a little hyperbolic at this point, but a potential realignment of global relations. You've had the West for so long, Europe, the U.S., in North America, you could say, instead of just Europe, but North America and Europe, and it's kind of been Russia, China, and some others on the outside. And now we're looking at Trump kind of really working to bolster this relationship with Russia. There's been a lot of conversation about what Ukraine is, if it's just a pawn to kind of fix some of this, or if we want to access the economy, yada, yada, yada. I mean, there's just a lot of moving pieces there. And so the knee-jerk reaction is, oh, a peace deal is bearish grains. And in reality, at this point, we don't, A, know what a peace deal looks like, and B, a peace deal could be, not necessarily the greatest thing for Ukraine potentially going forward. European Union leaders are definitely of the opinion that they cannot do what they need to do without the U.S. presence. And so these are all things that are going to have to be watched, because they could set us up for some really interesting dynamics as we move ahead. Last thing is, we're just going to kind of continue to watch what's going on out of South America from a cash market standpoint. Cash corn out of South America right now has hit a 2-year high. Brazil, specifically, South America is very large. Brazil is the one. Cash corn in Brazil right now has hit a 2-year high. They basically just are running on fumes from a supply standpoint. First crop corn in some areas was reduced slightly. Excuse me. Just choked on my own spit. That's attractive. But the first crop corn was reduced slightly because of drier conditions and some heat. And their demand is just surging. They have solid feed demand. They have solid ethanol demand. They continue to push for that. And so you're going to see a continuation of really strong prices that is likely to incentivize a second crop planting, well into March. You have seen safrinha planting catch up to where it's within the average. And now we're really going to kind of pay attention more to what the weather looks like April into May. But in the meantime, Brazil's got to try to figure out how they're going to make it through the next 4 months without much in the way of a big supply injection to speak of. And so, yeah, we'll keep watching that. Argentina looks like they will stabilize. Same thing, though. We're going to be waiting for harvest before they have a big flow of new supply available. They have some more bushels that are able to move into the pipeline potentially. But lots of moving pieces that's helping to strengthen bases here in the U.S. because we're the only supplier of consequence when it comes to corn, at least in the short term. And we'll be watching what happens with beans and what happens with China trade relations. So it's kind of awkward to be it's a soliloquy of market updates. But Ryan is not here to hear what is happening, but he will be back tomorrow. I'm sure he is super excited. And I will speak for him and say for everyone, have a happy Thursday. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. But otherwise, stay safe, stay warm if you're in the U.S. or anywhere that's cold, and we'll see what today brings.